Imagine this. You move into a nice, quiet neighborhood. The houses are clean, the lawns are trimmed, and everything looks peaceful. It feels like the kind of place where nothing crazy ever happens. But there's a catch. This neighborhood has a homeowners association, or HOA, as people call it. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You pay a small monthly fee, they keep the place looking good, and everyone just follows a few rules. Sounds fair, right? That's what I thought, too. Until I met her. Let's just call her Karen. She was the president of the HOA. And from day one, something felt off. You know that type of person who always seems to watch your every move? That was her. Except she didn't just watch. She commented. She complained. She controlled. At first, it was little things. She'd knock on my door to say my garbage can was 2 inches too far from the curb. Or she'd send out these aggressive emails to the whole neighborhood if someone left their porch light on too long. She acted like the queen of the block. Like the neighborhood was her own private kingdom. Some people ignored her. Others tried to stay on her good side. Me. I just kept to myself. I didn't want drama. I figured, if I followed the rules, I'd be fine. I was wrong. A few weeks after moving in, I noticed something strange. My mail wasn't showing up. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe the post office was just late. It happens, right? But then it started happening more often. Letters from the bank, packages I'd been waiting for, just gone. I called the post office. They said everything had been delivered. According to their records, my packages were dropped off like normal. But I never saw them. I started asking around. A few neighbors said the same thing. Things were missing. Small stuff at first, birthday cards, utility bills, online orders. Nobody could prove anything. And honestly, it was hard to believe. Who would steal mail in broad daylight? Still, it kept happening. And I couldn't stop thinking about Karen. She lived just down the street. Her house had a perfect view of the mailboxes. She always seemed to be outside, watering the same patch of lawn, pacing up and down the sidewalk, pretending to be busy. Something wasn't right. But accusing someone of stealing mail? That's serious. You don't throw around claims like that without proof. So I decided to watch. Not in a creepy way, just casually. I'd sit on my porch with a coffee in the morning and keep an eye on things. And that's when I saw it. One day, the mail truck pulled up like usual. The carrier dropped off the letters and drove off. A few minutes later, Karen walked over. She looked around, opened the box that belonged to me, took something out, slipped it into her jacket, and walked back like nothing happened. I couldn't believe it. Did I just see what I think I saw? I questioned myself 100 times. Maybe she was getting her own mail. Maybe she made a mistake. But the way she looked around first, the way she tucked the envelope into her coat, it felt wrong. I needed to be sure. So the next day, I set up a small camera. Nothing fancy. Just something to watch the mailbox and see what was really going on. And sure enough, the footage told the truth. There she was, again, opening boxes that weren't hers. Not just mine. 2 others, too. Quick, quiet, and confident, like she'd done it before. My hands were shaking when I watched it back. I felt angry, violated. But more than that, I felt like I finally had what I needed. Now, I just had to decide what to do next. Should I confront her? Go straight to the HOA? Call the police? All I knew was this. Karen had gone too far. And this time, she picked the wrong person. Because I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not now. Not ever. The neighborhood always seemed peaceful on the surface. Rows of well-kept houses, quiet streets, trimmed hedges. It was the kind of place people imagined when they thought of the American dream. But once you lived there long enough, you started to notice the cracks. Everything changed when Karen became the HOA president. She wasn't elected, at least, not in any real way. There was a vote, sure, but nobody ran against her. She practically forced herself into the role. People didn't want to get involved, so they just let her take charge. That was their first mistake. At first, Karen played the role well. She smiled during meetings, handed out newsletters, acted like she cared about the community. But once she settled in, her true colors showed. Suddenly, every small thing became a problem. She started handing out warnings like candy. One neighbor got a notice because their grass was a shade too long. Another got fined for hanging a small wind chime on their porch. A couple down the street. They were threatened with legal action over a basketball hoop their kids used after school. Nobody was safe. Karen made it clear, this was her neighborhood now. If you stepped out of line, even slightly, she'd come after you. She didn't just enforce rules. She made up new ones. Sometimes she'd slip them into the monthly HOA emails like they had always existed. She'd say things like, as previously stated, when in reality, no one had ever heard the rule before. And nobody challenged her. They were either too tired, too polite, or just scared of dealing with her. Karen thrived on that. She used fear as a tool. The quieter the neighbors got, the louder her voice became. I mostly kept to myself. I paid my dues, trimmed my lawn, kept my porch clean. I didn't want any trouble. But that didn't matter. Karen had her eye on me from the start. It began with small things. I got a warning for having a holiday wreath on my door past the seasonal deadline. Then came a complaint about the color of my mailbox, which had been the same since before I moved in. She even told me I couldn't park in my own driveway because my car obstructed the neighborhood aesthetic. It was exhausting. She always had some excuse. Always acted like she was doing the community a favor. Just following the rules, she'd say with a fake smile. But the thing is, Karen didn't follow the rules herself. She had her own car parked in a visitor-only space for weeks. Her dog barked non-stop, even though there were noise complaints. She once built a backyard shed without any approval, which was against the very guidelines she screamed at everyone else about. It was pure hypocrisy. Still, no one held her accountable. People whispered, complained behind closed doors, but never spoke up. I started thinking maybe the neighborhood had given up. But then the mail started disappearing. And everything shifted. What began as annoying power trips turned into something darker. Stealing mail wasn't just rude or inconvenient, it was a crime. A serious one. One you could go to jail for. Karen had crossed a line, and it wasn't just about control anymore. I tried to make sense of it. Why would she do it? Was it curiosity? Greed? Some twisted form of control? Or did she just think she could get away with anything? It didn't help that she acted so casual. Like nothing had happened. I'd see her walking around the block, watering her plants, waving at people like she wasn't committing a federal offense. It was surreal. I remember watching her from my window the day after I caught her on camera. She was wearing a wide sun hat, holding a tiny watering can, humming to herself like she was in a movie, completely unaware that her little empire was about to crumble. And that's when I knew, I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for everyone she'd bullied, threatened, or intimidated. Everyone who had to bite their tongue and pay her stupid fines. Everyone who was too afraid to stand up. The neighborhood needed to see the truth. They needed to know who Karen really was. And I was going to show them. The footage didn't lie. Karen was right there, plain as day, opening my mailbox. She wasn't even being that sneaky. Just walked up, looked around like she always did, reached in, and pulled out a small stack of letters. She flipped through them casually, tucked one into her coat, and walked away. Like it was nothing. Like it was hers. I watched the clip over and over. Part of me still didn't believe it. I mean, who does that? Who steals mail in 2024, in a neighborhood full of doorbell cameras and security systems? Did she think no one would notice? Or did she just think no one would dare say anything? But there it was. Clear, undeniable proof. I didn't act right away. I waited. I wanted more. So I left the camera up. Quiet. Hidden. Just in case it wasn't a one-time thing. And sure enough, it happened again. Same routine. The mail truck came, she waited a few minutes, then strolled over and took her pick. This time, she didn't even bother pretending to check her own mailbox. She went straight for mine. And it wasn't just my box, either. 2 houses down, same thing. One across the street. Karen had a little circuit, it seemed. A routine. She knew people weren't home during the day. She knew the timing of the mail carrier. And she counted on nobody watching. Except now, someone was. I took screenshots. Saved clips. Organized everything by date. I even took notes, what was missing, who it might have belonged to, how often it happened. I didn't want there to be any room for doubt. I wanted the case airtight. Because this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a federal crime. Mail theft is serious. It's not like breaking a lawn rule or forgetting to roll in your trash can. It carries real consequences. Jail time. Fines. A permanent record. And Karen. She was acting like it was just another Tuesday. I started thinking about how long she might have been doing this. How many people she'd stolen from. How many bills were never paid. How many packages just vanished. How many neighbors had to argue with customer service because their item never arrived. They probably thought it was the postal service messing up. Or maybe porch pirates. But no, it was Karen. Their friendly, nosy, overbearing HOA president. It made my skin crawl. Still, I wanted to be smart about it. No dramatic confrontations. No yelling at her in the street. That's what people like her want, chaos they can twist to their advantage. I was going to handle this the right way. So I reached out to the postal inspectors. Not just the local post office, they don't deal with theft like this. I called the USPS Inspector General's office. Told them everything. Explained the situation, laid out what I had, and offered to send all the footage. They took it seriously right away. Apparently, mail theft cases have been increasing, and when there's evidence like video, they move fast. I was assigned to an investigator. We spoke on the phone. He asked questions. Specific ones. Things like, was the mailbox locked? And did you ever give her permission to check your mail? Questions that made it clear they were building a solid case. I sent in the clips. Every single one. Then came the waiting. Days went by. Then a week. I didn't hear anything for a while. I started wondering if they'd forgotten, or maybe decided it wasn't worth the effort. But then, on a random Wednesday morning, I saw the unmarked car parked down the street. 2 men got out. Not in uniform, but definitely official. They knocked on Karen's door. I watched from my window as she opened it, acting as if she had no idea what was going on. They showed her something, probably a badge. She didn't look so confident then. They stepped inside. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then they came out again, with Karen in handcuffs. She looked stunned. Not crying, not screaming. Just frozen. Like it didn't feel real. Like she was trying to figure out how it all went wrong. And I couldn't help but wonder if, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in charge anymore. Word spread fast. Karen was the kind of person everyone knew, even if you didn't talk to her much. So when people saw her being walked out of her house in handcuffs, it didn't take long for the news to ripple through the neighborhood. At first, nobody believed it. They thought maybe it was some mistake. A misunderstanding. Some even said it must have been just a warning or not that serious. But then she didn't come back. The HOA meeting that month. Cancelled. No emails. No updates. Karen's house stayed dark for days. Her car disappeared. That annoying little reminder sign she always put in front of her lawn about HOA policies. Gone. People started asking questions. I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't sure how much I could share, or even if I should. But then neighbors began piecing things together. Some mentioned they hadn't gotten important letters. One guy said a package with sensitive documents vanished weeks ago. Another neighbor, an elderly woman, admitted she'd been missing her medication deliveries and thought it was just a pharmacy error. Everything started to make sense. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater. The more we talked, the more it unraveled. Karen had been stealing from more people than anyone had guessed. Not just me. Not just once. For some of these folks, it had been happening for months. And no one knew who to blame, until now. The thing that hit hardest. The trust. Everyone thought she was overbearing, Sure. Controlling, yes. But not a criminal. Not someone who'd literally reach into your mailbox and take something that wasn't hers. And definitely not someone who'd do it again and again like she was entitled to it. But she did. And once people accepted that, the tone shifted. Conversations started happening in driveways and front lawns. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were suddenly swapping stories, venting their frustration, even laughing at the absurdity of it all. For the first time in a long while, the community actually felt like, well, a community. It was strange, in a way. Karen had spent years trying to control every little thing, every blade of grass, every trash bin, every decoration, and in the end, it was her downfall that finally brought people together. And then came the questions about what to do next. Karen was still technically the HOA president. But no one wanted her back. No one trusted her anymore. The board, what little there was of it, had been mostly passive while she took over everything. They hadn't stopped her, hadn't challenged her, and honestly, they looked kind of embarrassed now. People began demanding change. Someone suggested holding a proper vote. Not just a name on a paper or a show of hands at a tiny meeting, but a real vote, with ballots and rules. Another neighbor proposed a complete review of all HOA policies, especially the ones Karen made up or manipulated. And people listened. For the first time in years, things felt different. There was a kind of momentum. A sense that maybe this neighborhood didn't have to be ruled by fear or pettiness anymore. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and smiles. Some folks were still skeptical. Others were just plain angry that it had gone on for so long without anyone doing something sooner. But most were just relieved that it was finally over. Or, at least, that it was finally being dealt with. As for Karen, word got around that she was facing real charges. Mail theft is a federal offense, after all. And with the video evidence and multiple reports from neighbors, it wasn't going to be easy for her to talk her way out of it. There were rumors about court dates, probation, even possible jail time. But honestly, most people didn't care about the exact outcome. They just wanted her gone. Out of the neighborhood. Out of their lives. And they wanted to make sure no one like her could ever take over again. So they started planning. Meetings were scheduled. Forms were printed. Neighbors volunteered to join the board. People who had never shown up to a single HOA meeting before were suddenly interested in how things worked. It was like the whole community had woken up from a long, quiet sleep. Karen had ruled through silence. But now, people were speaking. And once they started, they didn't want to stop. It's funny how quiet feels different when the tension is gone. For the first time in a long while, walking outside didn't come with that strange pressure in your chest. No more worrying about whether your trash bin was an inch too close to the sidewalk. No more wondering if the HOA newsletter would randomly call you out. No more watching your back every time you checked your mail. The silence now. It felt peaceful. Like the neighborhood could finally breathe. But even though Karen was gone, her presence still lingered. You could feel it in the way people talked, like they were still trying to believe it was real. Like they were adjusting to life without someone constantly lurking over their shoulders. And honestly, we were still discovering just how far things had gone. A week after her arrest, someone found a stash of mail. It wasn't hidden well, just stuffed inside an old storage bin behind Karen's shed, half covered with gardening tools. There were envelopes, magazines, small packages, even greeting cards. Some were months old. People gathered around as one of the postal inspectors collected it all. They handled every piece carefully, treating it like evidence, which it was. Nobody touched anything, but you could see the shock on their faces as they recognized their own names on the addresses. One neighbor saw a card from her sister she thought had gotten lost. Another spotted a birthday package she'd been arguing with the delivery company about for weeks. It was all there, just sitting behind Karen's house like it didn't matter. The worst part. Some of it was clearly opened. She hadn't just taken the mail, she'd read it. Ripped into packages. Peeled back envelopes. It wasn't just theft. It was personal. And suddenly, everything felt a little darker. People were angry. Rightfully so. This wasn't just about HOA drama anymore. This was about trust, about privacy. about knowing someone had been quietly violating your life from just a few doors down. But in the middle of all that, something else was happening too. People were coming together. A few of the neighbors who barely said hello before were now checking in on each other. One woman offered to help organize a neighborhood watch, just in case anything like this ever happened again. Another guy, a quiet, older man who never went to meetings, stepped up and said he wanted to run for the HOA board. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Everyone was just nodding, listening. Even the HOA, which had been Karen's little kingdom for years, started changing. They rewrote some of the policies, got rid of the weird rules Karen had created, started focusing on transparency. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was a start. As for me, people started coming up to thank me. At first, I didn't know what to say. I hadn't done it for attention. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted it to stop. But hearing their stories, seeing how relieved they were, made me realize how badly this neighborhood needed someone to speak up. It's easy to think you're the only one dealing with something. That maybe you're imagining it, or it's not that big of a deal. That if you just stay quiet, the problem will go away. But that's how people like Karen win. They count on silence. They thrive on people being too tired, too scared, or too polite to push back. They disguise control as order and manipulation as leadership. And before you know it, they've built a little empire on top of everyone's silence. Until someone says enough. And maybe that's what this whole mess was about. Not just catching someone doing something wrong, but showing what happens when a community wakes up. When people stop letting fear decide how they live. When they decide their peace and privacy aren't up for negotiation. We're still picking up the pieces. Still figuring out how deep it all went. But one thing's for sure, Karen isn't running this neighborhood anymore. Even after Karen was gone, there were ripples that kept spreading through the neighborhood, ripples nobody expected. The first few days felt strange. No more emails demanding we fix our lawn or remove garden gnomes. No more secret meetings where she whispered about who was out of line. But then, the quiet brought new challenges. People started noticing things they'd never paid attention to before. Like how much control Karen had over the HOA bank account. Or how many fines she'd handed out that never made it to official records. Turns out, she'd been collecting fees, pocketing money here and there, and using HOA funds for personal stuff. It was a shock. A betrayal. Neighbors who thought their community was safe realized it had been taken over, not just by an overbearing woman, but by someone who was abusing her power in ways nobody imagined. That made some people angry enough to get involved for the first time. Meetings filled up with voices demanding transparency, new leadership, and real change. It wasn't easy. Some old board members wanted to protect their reputations, while others genuinely wanted to make things better. But the momentum was unstoppable. We elected a new HOA president, someone quiet but fair, who promised to rebuild trust. The new board began going through old records, fixing budgets, and most importantly, setting clear rules that couldn't be twisted or ignored. At the same time, neighbors started talking more. Little conversations in driveways turned into block parties. People who had only said hi before were sharing stories, swapping tools, and even watching out for each other's homes when someone was away. That was the real change. Karen's reign had tried to isolate everyone. Keep them scared and silent. But once she was gone, people realized how much stronger they were together. And yet, there was still the question of what would happen to her. The court case dragged on longer than anyone expected. Mail theft is a serious charge, and the evidence was stacked high. But Karen had a good lawyer. She denied everything at first, claimed the videos were edited or misunderstood. She tried to make herself the victim. Some neighbors thought that was just her usual manipulation. Others felt frustrated that it was taking so long to get justice. While the case played out, the neighborhood watched closely. People who had once been quiet finally felt like they had a voice in how things were handled. They wrote letters to the judge, attended hearings, and made sure their concerns were heard. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure something like this never happened again. And that meant changes beyond just the HOA. The Postal Service got involved, 2. They installed better locks on the community mailboxes and started educating residents about mail theft prevention. A few neighbors even signed up for mail alerts, texts or emails that tell you when your package has been delivered. Technology became a tool for safety instead of suspicion. It was strange, realizing how much a single person's bad behavior could shake an entire community. But it also showed how resilient people could be. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, old grudges. Some people still struggled to trust. But there was also hope. A sense that we were finally on the right path. And maybe that's the hardest part of all, learning to trust again after someone like Karen tears it all down. Every day, little by little, the neighborhood rebuilt itself. One smile. One conversation. One act of kindness. Because in the end, it wasn't about one person's control or mistakes. It was about everyone coming together to protect what really matters: their homes, their privacy, and each other. The days turned into weeks, and life in the neighborhood slowly started to feel normal again. But the story wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about something bigger, the way people had come together, the way a community healed itself from the inside out. Neighbors who had never met before started checking in on each other. Simple gestures, like waving across the street or helping carry groceries, became everyday moments. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for something to change, and finally, they could exhale. What surprised me most was how many people decided to get involved after all the chaos. New faces showed up at the HOA meetings. People who had always been quiet or indifferent suddenly wanted to have a say. They brought ideas, questions, and a genuine desire to rebuild trust. One woman suggested starting a community newsletter, something different from Karen's strict and often threatening memos. This time, the newsletter was full of positive news, upcoming events, and helpful reminders without the harsh tone. It was a small change, but it made a big difference. Another neighbor, who was a retired teacher, volunteered to organize weekly meetups at the local park. These gatherings weren't just social. They became a way for people to learn about their rights, safety tips, and how to keep the neighborhood strong. It was empowering to see everyone come together in this way. Kids who had once been told to keep their noise down suddenly had permission to play outside without fear of complaints. Families began hosting barbecues and block parties, making the neighborhood feel alive again. It wasn't perfect, there were still disagreements, but the atmosphere was light years away from the tension that had gripped us before. Meanwhile, the court case against Karen moved forward. The legal process was slow, filled with paperwork, hearings, and back-and-forth arguments. But with every step, more details came out about how deep her mail theft scheme had gone. It wasn't just a few stolen letters, it was a pattern of control and abuse that affected dozens of families. Some neighbors found it hard to believe that someone they saw every day could be capable of such betrayal. Others felt a deep sadness, realizing how long it had been going on without being caught. But hearing their stories also brought a sense of closure. Finally, there was accountability. And that mattered. I remember the day the verdict came down. It was a quiet afternoon, but the news spread quickly. Karen was found guilty of mail theft and several related charges. She was ordered to pay fines, return stolen property when possible, and face probation. There was talk of community service, and the judge made it clear that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. The neighborhood exhaled again. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. More importantly, it was about reclaiming our community. People who had felt powerless for so long finally saw that standing up could make a difference. That the quiet voice of one person could grow into a chorus demanding change. And that's the story I want people to hear. Not just the drama of a HOA Karen stealing mail, but the power of a community refusing to be broken. The way neighbors came together, supported each other, and rebuilt trust. The way people took back their streets, their privacy, and their peace of mind. It wasn't easy. It took courage. It took patience. It took standing up when it would have been simpler to stay silent. But in the end, that's what made all the difference. Because no one should live in fear of the person next door. And no one should have to wonder if their mail will ever arrive safely again. This neighborhood isn't perfect. We're still learning. Still growing. But what we are now is stronger. And that strength comes from knowing that when people stand together, even the most entitled Karen can't hold them down. That's the real victory here.